Veronica and Konstantin got married a year and a half ago. Konstantin was much older than his wife, who had just recently graduated from university. In fact, her husband took her to live with him right away from her parents. She managed to work for 2 years, and then almost immediately after the wedding she quit. She said there was a lot of stress, and the bosses had become completely inadequate. She decided to take a couple of weeks off and then look for work. On weekends, she went out with her friends several times a week, went to the gym for group exercise, and the rest of the time she sat at home, watched movies, and read. One day, her husband was sitting at work and reading through paperwork. He was distracted by a phone call. It was an unfamiliar number, but he couldn't help but answer. It could have been a new customer, but he realized from the very greeting of the caller that he was receiving another call from a representative of his internet provider. Once again, he was being offered an additional video surveillance service. The man rolled his eyes. He was already tired of receiving these calls. "Konstantin, this is the security of your property and household. In the summer, there are more frequent break-ins." The man thought about it. Indeed, recently their neighbors were robbed, and they could not find the thief, and then return the items because they were quickly sold. It was hard to say whether it was out of fear or because he had already been fed up with this intrusive offer. But the man agreed to the installation. Only he decided not to tell his wife about it. He didn't want her to be unnerved. He thought it was more of a reassurance. Chances were, he wouldn't see anything but frantic runs from their cat there. But unfortunately for him, he was dead wrong. About a month had passed. Veronica was still in no hurry to find a job. In fact, she liked the feeling of freedom. Her husband did not reproach her for not going to the job interview until now. He told her to let her do it when she felt ready. One day in the middle of the day, her husband opened his briefcase to find one flash drive for work, but suddenly saw that it wasn't there, even though he definitely remembered holding it in his hands back home that morning. He worried that he might have lost it somewhere along the way. But before he panicked, he should check. Maybe he had dropped it at home. He decided not to call his wife because she wasn't going anywhere that day, and she could have gone to bed. When she quit her job, her body was probably full of energy, and she was often drowsy in the afternoon. Now the cameras would come in handy, thought her husband, smirking weakly. He turned on the program on his phone and began to rewind the tape for the morning. Here he comes out of the kitchen, takes a flash drive from the shelf in the living room, then goes into the hallway. And before he gets his shoes on, he puts the drive on the nightstand. And, of course, not having remembered it in the rush, he runs off to work. Now everything made sense. The man even breathed a sigh of relief, but then noticed something strange on the tape. As soon as the husband left, the wife returned to the kitchen and started looking out the window. In a sort of impatience, she was clearly making sure her husband was definitely gone. Then she went to the dressing table and began to put on her makeup. Where on earth was she going? The husband thought with surprise. He put the tape on fast forward. My wife began to choose a dress, and in the end, an hour and a half later, she went somewhere. Maybe she went to the grocery store or decided to go shopping, the husband thought. He turned on the recording in real time, but his wife was not there, so she hadn't been home in about 6 hours. He called her. She picked up the phone only the second time. "Hi, honey, are you home right now?" He asked calmly. "Pie. Well, not really. I went out for a walk." "Tired of sitting at home," she answered. "Are you in our park?" The husband clarified and paused. He listened. "Well, yes, here," she said. "Is something urgent? Let's talk tonight, maybe. I met a friend." The husband said nothing urgent and ended the conversation. It didn't sound like the wife was anywhere outdoors. It sounded like she was indoors somewhere. According to the cameras, the wife did not return home until an hour later. In the evening, the couple sat down to dinner, and the husband asked how the day's walk had gone. "You know, I had dinner, and then I really wanted to walk." They say you definitely won't gain weight that way. Ended up walking for an hour or an hour and a half. Met my former classmate, she answered. My husband looked at her intently. She lied so masterfully. After all, according to the cameras, she had left much earlier. One thing he didn't understand this morning. Why would she lie? Was she hiding something? The next day, her husband scoured the internet for a small tracking device of his, that he could slip discreetly into his wife's purse and track where she was secretly going. Once he found what he was looking for, he put the little device in Veronica's purse pocket that evening, and he did it very timely. The next day his wife, she said, was going nowhere, which meant it was the perfect opportunity to check on her. The next morning her husband was already sitting at work, occasionally checking Veronica's whereabouts. This time, she had not left the house so early, but only by lunchtime. Her husband watched her movements carefully when she finally stopped somewhere. He left work early and drove to the location. When he arrived at his destination, he was surprised to find that it was a branch of that chain of gyms where his wife worked out. Except she went to the gym that was closer to their house, and this one was completely on the other side. The husband saw his wife sitting near the front desk, waiting for something or maybe someone. While her husband was trying to figure out why his wife was here, a young man with a duffel bag on his arm came out from the front of the dressing room. Veronica saw him. Quickly she stood up and happily ran over to him. The man said something to the receptionist. It looked like he worked as a trainer at the gym. They exchanged a few words with his wife and then left the building. At this point, they were holding hands. Then they went somewhere down the street, and Konstantin kept watching them while he switched his phone to camera mode. Finally, they came to an apartment building and headed for one of the entrances. When the coach had already opened the door, letting Veronica inside, he slapped her hard on the buttocks. She laughed playfully, and they disappeared behind the door. Konstantin had no desire, not only to have any kind of a showdown, but even just to have contact with his wife. He went home, gathered all her things, and took them to her parents. Without further ado, he showed them the video he had taken, which made his mother-in-law even grip her heart. They did not pester Konstantin with any additional questions. Then he wrote to Veronica that her things were already at her parents', and she should not return to him when she started to call him to find out what had suddenly come over him. Her husband didn't pick up the phone. It wasn't long before her parents called her, so all questions were immediately put to rest. As it turned out later, this trainer replaced his colleague several times at the gym near their home. He and Veronica had met there and had met each other outside of training. Veronica was still too young and foolish to understand that there were many people like her at the coach's place. That's why she resented him so much when, after her separation from her husband, he refused to live with her. She thought their connection was special. But Konstantin immediately smelled that the coach had a good job, so he reported to his management about the professional behavior of their employee. It turned out that this was not the first complaint about the coach from her husband, his subordinate. Therefore, it was decided to fire the employee, creating such uncomfortable situations for the company. Veronica continued to live with her parents. Only now she had to look for a new job much more actively. Mom and Dad were not particularly thrilled that their adult daughter again sat on their necks, and even with such a crash flew out of her husband's apartment. Along the way, she continued to go on dates and look for someone who could take care of her the way Konstantin did. But she met mostly uninterested, infantile men who only liked her good figure. After a few months of such unsuccessful meetings, Veronica truly realized what a good man she had lost. But she had no way back. Konstantin was building his life, and he would not let the traitor back in again. That's such a story from life. Share in the comments what you think about this situation and the behavior of the characters. And thanks for listening to the story to the end.